I'd like to call the meeting to order. I guess I should get my agenda. We'd have roll call, please.
Cam Collier.
Here.
Bill Carba. Here. Ken Meyer.
Here. And you were all emailed a copy of the minutes from our December 6th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second to approve the minutes from December 6th. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Thank you. First thing up, Dan and gentlemen from Midwestern. Just will step right on up here to the table.
Sure.
Dan, brief us on what we're hearing here. Then we'll let you guys take it away.
We had Midwestern engineers do a feasibility study for us. I think everybody realizes that we have two water plants. Our new one is 46 years old. Our well field out on Pickway Road, the water supply is dwindling. We only have 15 years left on that contract, and the owner is not real great at negotiating with the city. So we've started exploring some options. We have one supply line down to Bern. There's two wells in Bern to supply the Winchester plant, and there's an abundance of water down there. This plant out here, not so much, and the plant's very old. So we wanted somebody to help us look at some options on what we could do. So, you know, we could rehab the plants, we could run a new line down to Bern. There's just different options. So Midwestern ran a feasibility study for us. They looked at all the options we have, and they're going to show you what they found.
Thank you. Greetings.
Greetings. My name is Mark Sullivan. I'm with Midwestern Engineers. To my left is Steve Bender. He's with Midwestern also. He did a lot of the majority of the pencil pushing on this, so I had him here to cover me, and we'll try to be brief. Feel free to interrupt if you have a question. Fire it off while we go, and we'll just kind of interact through it. But I wanted to kind of just get through it quickly and then answer any questions you have. What we have on the screen is a PowerPoint presentation. We took the report, which is this, 2 inches thick and all kinds of alternatives, and so we didn't get bogged down. We pulled out the selected alternative and what the recommendations are, and we thought we would talk through that, and then if questions arise, if we need to refer back to any of the other alternatives, we can talk about that. Like Dan said, up on the screen you'll see this presents the existing facilities. You have two water plants. You have Monroe Street, which is up here just east of the building, down across the river on Monroe. The well field is highlighted in the blue just to the north. Winchester Street plant is to the south. And then you have the raw water line from the Bern wells, which set out east to Bern or southeast to Bern, all the way up to the Winchester plant. How many miles is that? About 12 miles. About 12 miles south to Bern. The plants, like Dan said, the new plant is pushing 50 years old. Your well field north that feeds the water into Monroe Street is getting to the end of its useful life. You need to start thinking proactively of finding a replacement for that well field to the north. That's ultimately our objective, is to find another water source and to look at the renovation of the two existing plants. That kind of shows a blow up of the lower red dot is, or I'm sorry, a little farther down you'll see the Monroe plant down in this area, and then this just depicts the existing wells. Those are the wells that I'm talking about that are getting towards the end of their useful life. Monroe Street has served its purpose for many, many years. We initially went into this looking to see if we could reuse Monroe, if we could rehab it and make use of it. This picture kind of says 1,000 words of the Monroe Street plant. I'm not sure, even though we didn't press any of the funding agencies, but I don't believe any of the funding agencies will even pay money to renovate the plant setting in a floodplain like it is. And as you're well aware, and I think this picture is dated 2015, the facilities, we would need to completely redo this plant, and just the mere fact of where it sits near the river kind of throws it out as a viable option. So we moved on. This picture shows the Winchester Street plant on the south end of town and just gives you a quick view of what it looks like. If it would need to be expanded, the nice thing is at Winchester you have available land, plenty of room to do any type of expansion that you would need to do at Winchester. To give you an idea of the sizes of the two plants, if ideally in an ideal situation we could build a new plant to replace Monroe, ideally out on the east side of town, and I'll show a picture of this next, and if we could renovate the Winchester Street plant, we are ideally looking for two plants that can produce 1,750 gallon per minute production. What that does is, if you look at 1,750 running for a full day, there's 1,440 minutes in a day, produces about 2.5 million gallons worth of water. The chart that you see above, we present what your current water usage is. Here in 2015, on an average day, you use about 1.3 million gallons of water. Your maximum day, when people were watering lawns and stuff, you're using about 2.25 million gallons of water. We project that out to the year 2040, just assuming what would be normal predicted population growth. And you can see that we need to be able to have a peak demand, or meet a peak demand of 2.47 MGD and an average day of 1.43. Where the 1750 comes into play is, if you have two plants at 1750, either plant could run 24 hours a day and produce your peak demand. That would mean that you could take the other one out of service and do any kind of necessary repairs. So you're not, the beauty of having two redundant plants, or that redundancy, it gives you the ability to do repairs. If the main from Byrne up to Winchester Street would develop a leak or be taken out of service, you don't lose your water service in the city. You can carry that load with one plant. Then what we try to show is, if two plants are running, which would produce 3,500 gallon per minute, you could meet your peak daily demand by only running both plants a half a day. And probably more realistically, when you get to just what your average day demand is, two plants running together could meet that daily demand running about six hours a day. So you have plants that running about a third of the day meet your demand, and if you have a problem where you got to take one plant out of service for whatever reason, you've got that second plant to cover you, and you're not out of water. That's the concern that you have right now, especially if you would have something disastrous happen to the raw water main coming up from Byrne. If we would get a major leak, or if that's out of service, you're going to be hard pressed. If that would happen in the summertime when people are trying to water and high water demands, you would have trouble meeting those demands and would be out of water. So the key to this whole project is ultimately going to be finding water. And what this map shows, this map was produced by Peerless Midwest, and it's what's called a fracture trace analysis. Their hydrogeologists look at ground contours, they look at surface indications in the terrain that would indicate fractures in the subsurface below. Fractures tend to transmit or move water along, move that groundwater. If you have two fractures intersect, it's a high probability that if a well is put at that intersection of two fractures, that you're going to have a good source of water. This map shows blue dots and green dots. Blue dots indicate that you have three or more intersections of fractures intersecting each other. Green dots indicate at least two intersections. So blue dots would indicate a high probability that a well that was put at that area would produce water. The site here that I'm circling to the east, this 100-acre site that's currently owned by the city, is very promising. It has a lot of blue dots, a lot of fractures. This is the site that we think that the city ought to focus on as your source of your new water wells. You can see it in relationship to Monroe, which is here in the red, and in relationship to your existing well field that will ultimately be abandoned. It looks very promising, and probably the next move would be to have Peerless out there actually drilling wells, test wells. And what they'll do is they'll actually drill down and see if indeed they can hit that seam and produce the water that we need. The options in the punch list, or the punch line, when we get to the very end of this report and say, here's what you ought to do, it is all contingent upon being able to find water. If we can't find water, it isn't possible to have the second plant. As a recommended plan, we're recommending that you would construct a new water treatment plant out on that 100-acre site in the vicinity of new wells. But if we don't hit that water, there's not a new water plant that'll go there. We would have to kick to a plan B, which would be completely carry all the load of the treatment down at the Winchester Street well, or at the Winchester Street treatment plant. And the Burn wells, which have tons and tons of water down at Burn, we would have to upgrade the raw main and just bring all the water from Burn. That's going to be the ultimate punchline when I get to the end of it, but that's kind of where we're going. Right now, our focus is to try to pursue the water out on that 100-acre site and hopefully be successful in finding water out there. So the ultimate recommended project would be an east side well field and an east side water treatment plant that would be constructed on the 100-acre site that I was just referring to. If we're successful in finding the water that would produce 1,750 gallons per minute, like we talked, we would be off and running with a new plant there. Once that new plant is constructed, it could carry the load while you completely redo Winchester Street and rehab the force main, or the raw water main to the south down to Burn. Both that raw water main, Winchester, and the new plant all need improvements, obviously, to get you back up to a condition where you'll have good water service for the next 40, 50 years. So the recommendations of the report ultimately recommend a new east side well field and treatment plant pending being able to find that water, renovation and expansion of the Winchester Street plant, and the rehabilitation of the raw water transmission main from Burn, which is this blue line all the way up. From Monroe down to the wells, that's the ductile iron section, isn't it, Bill? Yeah, so this is by far the worst section of main that we need to rehab, which is all ductile or metallic pipe. Have had problems with leaks and stuff, and it's something that's going to need some care fairly soon. From Monroe north, that's PVC pipe, and that's a little bit more durable and a little bit more manageable. When we get to the cost, you'll see kind of the cost for these three options and what we've estimated to rehabilitate the water main. This picture just shows a blow-up of the 100-acre site, and the feedback that we're getting from Peerless, if you looked at the map with the blue dots and overlaid it onto this, in the areas where the blue dots are would be where Peerless Midwest would want to do test wells and try to find that water that we're hoping we will find out there. If ideally wells could be drilled and produce enough water here on the south end, we would probably recommend somewhere up on the property to the north end putting a new water plant. That can be determined at a later date, and it's really all going to be contingent upon where the wells are drilled and where we find the water. Renovation, the second phase would be the renovation of the Winchester Street plant. What you're seeing at Winchester Street is the horizontal pressure filters. These are the units that treat for iron removal. The iron filters, water's pumped through that. It captures the iron It's backwashed as a waste, and then the clean water obviously goes on out. Also within the Winchester Street plant are water softeners. And the tanks that you see in this picture are the existing water softeners. Both Monroe Street and Winchester Street have water softeners, and as you know from our previous presentation, the regeneration of those softeners create a brine waste, which creates chlorides in the sewer system, which has given us fits over at the wastewater treatment plant. Regardless of what improvement is made to the two treatment plants, we have to address that chloride issue to help the wastewater plant. If you remember in that original report, we talked about having detention tanks. Right now, the violations at the wastewater plant occur whenever we backwash or regenerate a softener. There's a huge slug of salt water or brine water that goes out to the plant, and that peak is causing a violation. What that recommended in the plan, or in the wastewater plan, was that we put a large detention tank. We capture that brine regeneration, and then we release it over a 24-hour period or a 2-day period at a slower rate to try to take those peaks off and get it back within limits where we can handle that flow. There is another technology, though, and one of the things that we may want to strongly look at when we start looking at doing new water plants, there's technology that allows softening to be done without the use of salt. It completely makes your brine and your chloride situation completely go away. It uses a silica sand that allows the calcium to attach to that, captures that hardness, and then you throw away the sand versus throwing away the brine water that would go back to the wastewater plant. The nice thing about this, you don't have any salt involved. The downside of this is rather than worrying about disposing of a brine waste, now you've got to worry about the disposal of the sand that has the calcium attached with it. There are a number of plants, when I say a number, I can think of 4 or 5 here in the state of Indiana that use this technology, and they use it for this very reason of what you're battling, trying to keep chlorides from going to the wastewater plant and causing those violations.
Is the disposal, where do you dispose of it? Is that costly?
They dispose of it on a farmer's field. People reuse it for a grit, either in concrete, sanding. What was it, the suggestion you had, Bill?
We talked about mixing it with our backfill and using it to backfill trenches.
It's a non-hazardous.
So it's not something that's expensive to get rid of. It's usable.
Yeah, it's just that you're going to have to dispose of a quantity of sand that has calcium attached to it versus disposing of the brine water like we do now. So I think it's a very viable option, and I think, and the one thing, whether you choose to soften by ion exchange, which is the salt process, or whether you soften by this, which is referred to generically as fluidized bed reactors, the cost is relatively the same. So what we've talked over with Bill and Dan is to visit a few of these plants, make sure that we understand the operation, the skill level that the operators need to operate it, make sure that it's something that they want to tackle. The beauty is it gets salt completely out of the system and you're off to a whole new process, still have your soft water, but don't have to deal with the salt anymore. So I really like the idea. We wanted to at least throw that out today to say, regardless of what process you choose, the numbers that we're presenting is valid for either technology. There's not a lot of difference in cost. It's just a different way of doing things.
How long has that been used in these other communities, and what's their experience?
What year did you design the one in Caesars?
I did that plant about 18 years ago.
He designed one for the Caesars Riverboat Casino down on the Ohio River 18 years ago. I live in Greenwood. Bargersville Water has 2 of these plants, and they've probably been there 6 or 8 years. Does that sound right?
The new plant is about that old. The one on Smith Valley Road, I'd say it's probably been there at least 30 years.
30?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the oldest in Indiana.
Yeah. So it's really not a new technology.
It's very, very common in France and other parts of Europe.
Why is it not more common here?
Salt is still inexpensive, probably.
Exactly, and the limits. You're a perfect example.
Yeah.
You haven't had limits on chlorides until this last permit go around, or you started testing the previous permit and then they hit you with the limits. Prior to this, they never dinged people for the salt, and so people did the old-fashioned way, or did the way that we do at our houses and use, salt regeneration softeners.
And that's what you got to be concerned about as a city. You want to make sure your water is soft, because if you start getting homes putting water softeners in,
They'll go right back to the old way.
Then you're back in the same situation at a stormwater facility.
Right. We are seeing this technology primarily driven because of the wastewater limits becoming more and more popular. And the two major manufacturers of waste or water treatment components is Tonka and General Filter, and both of those companies have done this type of technology for a number of years. So, in fact, they wanted to come down today and present, and I kind of pulled back the reins and said, let's get through the report first, and then we can worry about the technologies. I think today what we need to grasp is, if we would choose to go this route, the cost numbers that we're presenting are valid, whether we would do this type of technology or whether we would continue to do ion exchange. Talk about the rehab of the raw water main coming up from Bern. This is another project that we did in the state of Indiana. On the left, and you kind of have trouble getting your bearings straight, on the left is a cutout section of a water main that has what they call incrustation, all the mineral deposits on the inside of the main. Now, we're not necessarily saying your main looks like this. It's a good chance it does, though, and that's not uncommon for a main. Now, in this instance, this is a cast iron main that had been in the ground for 100 years. We came in, we're able to access the main internally. They do what they call pigging out, or they clean all that mineral deposits out of the inside, and in this instance, it was relined with a PVC liner. Took it from a cast iron main, and now it has a PVC internal liner, and essentially restored the life of that water main, both structurally and operationally, for the next 50, 60 years. I only put that up there. Now, whether this is actually used on the main to the south, that would be one of the technologies we would look at. There may be some areas where it's just cheaper to cut out and replace, or redo, or fix joints, and so there's any number of rehabilitation methods that could be used. The beauty of all this ties together. If we can find water out east, build the new east side plant to where it can take over the water service to town, you can take a big main to Bern out of service and do any type of repair to fix it and then get it back in service. If we don't have that new main to the east, now we're solely dependent on Winchester, and really the only option we have to reinforce the existing main is to parallel it with an entirely new main. The next slide, we're going to show the construction costs, and essentially if we can find water out east, build a new east side plant, redo Winchester Street, and rehab the main, total project cost is around $15 million. What I was leading into with that was, if we cannot build the east side plant, we have to depend solely on Bern to provide all of our water from the south. We have to parallel a new raw main side by side with that to get a good, reliable main and some redundancy. That project cost presented in the report is about $20 million. So there is some substantial savings if we can find that water out east of town and build that second plant. You know, the initial reaction would be to think, well, shoot, if we could do it all with one plant, that has to be cheaper. But it's actually cheaper if we can find that water source out east, build the new plant that's that's half the size of what you'd have to increase Winchester up to. It's going to be cheaper if we can find that water, build that second plant out east, renovate Winchester, and then only rehab the main from Bern up. and not have to completely replace it. If you look at the cost, the new east side facilities and wells is estimated a little over $4 million. Renovating Winchester Street plant, just shy of $4 million. And then the rehabilitation of the main is a little over $4 million. We put in mobilization, bonds and insurance, just to give us an idea of what that total construction cost would be roughly $12 million. We do add in a contingency of 10%, and then all the costs down below are all the engineering, rate consultants, legal, everything that would be involved. Most likely with this amount of money you're going to be doing some type of bonding, whether it be through USDA Rural Development, the state of Indiana State Revolving Loan Fund, or the open bond market. Probably the open bond market's going to be a little too costly, so you're probably going to be either with rural development or what they call SRF, State Revolving Loan Fund, as a source of money. In any case, you're still going to have bond counsel, rate consultants, and all that cost figures into it. So to give you just a general idea of the impact, I mean, 15 million sounds like a large number. What I have in these two tables, and these are tables that I pulled out of the report, I looked at SRF funding and USDA funding. And initially, we won't use the grant word of getting grant money, which is ultimately our goal. But just to show you kind of the range or what the impact of a $15 million project would have on the city, I ran these tables. SRF funding will provide low interest money for 20 years, repayable over 20 years. So if you take that first column that I'm looking at, I took $15,300,000 project cost, the annual principal and interest on that size loan. Right now the interest rate at SRF is 2%. The annual interest rate for 20 years would be $935,700. They require bond coverage, and SRF requires 20% bond coverage, similar to mortgage insurance. If you back in the day when you first got your mortgage, you probably had mortgage insurance. It's a guaranteed to develop a pot of money in case there's some tough times and you struggle making that annual principal and interest. 20% bond coverage on $935,000 is $187,140. So roughly, you would have to generate about $1.12 million of revenue every year to make your payments on that size of a loan through SRF. Just a generic number for customers, and we can fine-tune this, but generically, there's roughly 4,500 customers in Decatur. So if I divide 1.12 million by 4,500 customers, divided by 12 months a year, that says that would raise water bills by $20.79. So whatever the existing average water bill is, the new average water bill would be $20 or almost $21 higher. USDA Rural Development funding, they provide low interest loans for 40 years, a term of 40 years. Their bond coverage is 10%. So just to show you the impact of a rural development funded project, annual principal and interest is a little over $559,000 annually. The bond coverage of 10% is $55,930. Annual required income, $615,000 divided by your customers, divided by 12 months a year, is about $11 and a half a month.
What kind of interest rate's that?
Right now, well, what I did, that interest rate for what you would qualify for last week was 1.875%. Just yesterday, they raised their rates from 1.875 to 2.75. My calculation is based on 2%. I thought, they're at 187. I thought, let's bump in a little. What I would propose to do in the report, and I think I'll do that when I send this up here, would be to bump it to the 2.75. So it is going to have a little bit of impact. My guess is it's probably going to take this from 11 to probably $12 or $13. So not a huge difference, but it's going to bump it some. But I do have to admit, and whenever you talk rates, that's always the punchline to these reports, and everybody's perception of what's high and what's not high. On a $15 million project, I was expecting to see a lot higher than $11 a month impact. That's with no grant funding whatsoever. What I did in this lower table, with the USDA has 3 tiers of funding. They have what they call poverty level, intermediate level, and market level. From a pure median household income, we qualify for the poverty level, but they do not give that out unless you have some type of imminent environmental concern or problem. If the water was contaminated, or if there was an immediate environmental reason that we had to do this, we could fall into the poverty level. Otherwise, most normal projects fall into the intermediate level, which is the 1.875. At the intermediate level, they will give up to 45% of the project in grant. Now, I say that with a huge, huge asterisk, because you're not going to, well, I'm not going to say, you never say never, but most likely you will not get 45% grant. I spoke directly with the director of this region, Laura Hammond, and she indicated they determine the amount of grant that they put into a community by they look across the state of Indiana for multiple communities that are the exact same size as Decatur, same number of users, water usage. They have a whole bunch of factors, and then they look at what their water bills are, and they put in enough grant to make sure that you stay in line, that you're not way up here and everybody else your size is down here. But if this project and if this $11 raises you into the range where you're right with everybody else, they won't put any grant in. So it's purely a comparison of your peers. Rural development will not commit to the grant money until we run the gamut of their process, which means submit a report, submit an environmental report, get all that in with an application, get your name in the hat, then they review everything and they make a determination of how much loan, how much grant they will give you. My goal with this table was to say if you get the maximum 45%, which I would say it's probably a snowball's chance of landing there, that still increases the rate by $6.27. So on the absolute best case of the maximum grant, you're probably going to jump up $6 or $7 a month. And without grant, you're probably in the $11, $12, $13 a month range. So that at least gives you a general feel of what the ultimate impact of that size project would have on the community. Beyond that, where do we go from here? Since everything that we discuss hinges on finding the water out east, probably the first thing you should do is engage Peerless to do test wells and see if we can find that water that we need out east. If we can't find the water out east, or if we can't find the water, and we looked at multiple sites, we also looked beyond that 100-acre site. There's what we call the river site just west of there, and it has some potential too, but you don't own that, so you're going to be back into land acquisition and stuff. But if we can't find water, the only other option then is to go down and increase the water production at Burn. There's tons of water down there, so that won't be a problem finding the water. It's just the cost of another main out there. And in general terms, where we were originally talking a $15 million project, it goes to a $20 million project. But the real kicker is we need to see if we've got that water out east. The other thing that you ought to be thinking about is getting this report along with the environmental report, which it hasn't been prepared. Really, this report is 95% of what needs to go into RD, rural development. Initially, it was just done as a feasibility to get our costs, but it's pretty close to what would go into rural development. I would get this up to snuff and into them, along with the environmental and your application, to at least get your name in the hat and see what kind of grant money they'll throw at it. You could look at the whole proposal and say, no thanks, we'll do something else. But at least it gets your name in the hat to where then they would commit on grant money. Obviously, we want to review the test drilling and hydrological report, which would confirm whether we could go out east or whether we'd have to go south. Then once you receive a funding commitment, then you're off and running. And the only other thing I didn't mention is probably as you start getting into this funding consideration and stuff, you probably will want to engage your rate consultant, whoever that might be that you work with. One of the things that has to accompany this report in, where I calculated your user rates, I'm kind of like that guy in the commercial that said, well, I'm not an accountant, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Those are very close. That's exactly how your rate consultants are going to do it, but we'll have to have a certified rate consulting report taking those costs and calculating those user rates, and then we put it in the appendix of the report. So all in all, that's kind of the big picture of everything. Long-winded explanation. Any questions?
Great explanation.
What's the environmental aspect that needs to be added to this in order to get it to rural development?
It's work-wise, it's fairly minimal. We have to send out letters to about 20 different agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They identify any endangered species with the project. Archaeological people to make sure there's
Artifacts.
no ancient Indian burial ground. We could have all those letters out probably in a 2-week period. Then you wait 60 to 90 days for DNR and everybody to respond back. Once you have those responses, we bind it into a report that basically says here's what they say, and we have to say, you know, if there's any species identified, how we would mitigate to not disturb, you know, if there's happened to be a bat, endangered bat in a certain woods, we'd have to probably say we're going to build out and around that woods, or those type of things. The report, the impact of the report, we can the actual monetary cost of that is minimal. Probably the report's $3,500. At this point of the game, we're looking at $1,500 or $15 million. From my standpoint, if that's something you want to do, we can get that whipped out and at least get those letters sent off, and I'm not even worried at this point about the money side of it. It's more getting it off to the agencies and getting those responses back in 60 to 90 days. At the same time, what we would have to add to this report, where we have a lot of the project costs, they make you do long-term life cycle analysis and analyze and come up with what's truly cost-effective based on the life cycle analysis, which it'll still prove out the same way, but we have to add in those calculations that the government wants to see. Again, this report is probably 95% there, just add those in. Once the environmental comes back, you're ready to turn that into RD along with your application and at least get your name in the hat. I would say if you move forward with something like that, you would probably be ready to go into RD probably around April 1st. And that's probably not a bad time. They're going to review things for 4 to 6 months. Their fiscal year starts in October, so you would be having an approved plan and a game plan about the time they kick in their new money, so you'd be right at the head of the line for any grant money that they might have. So it's probably good timing where we're at right now. But those two things, the test drilling and getting that into a funding agency, is probably your two next tasks that you'd want to do. Your rate consultant may have thoughts on SRF. SRF is a similar process, environmental report, turn the report in. They typically don't have as much grant money as rural development, but they're starting to get more. So I have a couple of projects where we went both routes. We turned the report and the environmental in both ways and see who kicks back the best deal to you. once we have this report and the environmental ready to go, it could go both ways. So that may be something you want to look at, but at least my gut feeling is right now, probably rural development's going to be the more affordable, primarily because of the 40-year term.
If the city puts off acting in the manner that you suggest, do we run the risk that rates could go up even further?
Yeah, I think you always run that. You always run that risk. And I've done this for 30 years, and I can think of a number of jobs that people 5 and 10 years ago put it off, and then they said, "Well, I wish we would have done it back then." So that's just kind of the way things go. So if the economy takes off, I think that's a real factor, and we're already starting to see interest rates starting to go back up.
What would the cost of the testing, the peerless testing, be?
We got a quote this week.
$66,190.
And that's drilling, the test well would actually be an oversized well. The casing would be in there so that if we decide to go ahead and go with it, if the well's already drilled. If you drill a smaller test well, I think it was probably still $30,000 or $40,000 or more.
$30,000. And then if it's good, then you have to
Still drill the well.
off the side and drill another well.
Well, finding the water is all dependent on these fractures things.
Yeah,
And-
yeah. And that's a whole science in itself. That's why we sub with other companies. And Peerless, they have hydrogeologists that specialize in that. So that's their bailiwick. But yeah, that's going to be, as far as our report, it all hinges upon being able to find that.
And there's
water.
no percentage of likelihood of the water. I mean, other than the fact that this is...
No, but one thing you can, if you guys look at page 7, you have page 7 on there.
right.
Page 7 on there. If you look at our existing well field, which is in the blue,
Yeah.
the shaded blue, those fractures were actually done in that the first analysis they did years ago. I mean, there's literally 3 fractures that go through the whole property, and there's not a well drilled anywhere near any of the fractures. So 1 fracture should get you more water. 2, even more, and 3 are the blue dots. If you look at the field we own out there by the city woods, there's blue dots all over the place.
7 of them.
If you look at our field, our existing one, there's nothing. And we still had decent water. But from what Peerless has seen on many jobs they've done, the more fractures you have, the likelihood goes way up that there's going to be water. It's more water. I think it's just cracks in the rock. That's where the water runs. So our field we have now out here on Pickway Road has nothing. I mean, it's just solid rock.
Right across the road from it.
Right across the road to the east,
Yeah.
there is a decent field.
Yep.
But the fact that we already own this, and it's not that far, it's actually right near one of our towers, it's a perfect scenario. We hope there's water there.
Sure.
But there's tons of fractures on that property.
In the old days, they would guesstimate where to drill. They might look at some well logs, or Bob Smith down the road has a pretty good well. Maybe we go down his way. This at least gives you an educated guess. There's no guarantee you're going to find water there, but it increases the odds of finding water if you drill in those where you got multiple intersections of fractures.
In our existing well field, one of the fracture lines does actually run right under the plant, the Monroe Street plant, and the well that's in the plant is actually our best well by far, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only one that actually sits near a fracture line.
It actually pumps about 3 times what any of the other wells pump.
And that's 1 fracture line. These blue dots are 3 fractures.
And the only way to test for water is to drill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially when I think they're proposing to go down about 400 feet. So it really is the only way to find it. So.
There's $66,000 in the
Yeah, that's...
water fund?
Yeah. And basically, I mean, this is the first step, and this is what we're asking, is to go forward with this part of it, which I think it would be, they couldn't do it any time before January, and A lot of that depends on the weather. If the ground isn't totally frozen, what do you say, the rig's 80,000 pounds?
Yeah, the drill rig.
If it's not totally frozen, they can't go in there right now. We'd have to build a road, basically, to get back there, right? The nice thing out there is with the shooting range and stuff, there is a road built. It could help, but this is dependent on weather. We need the ground to freeze right now to even be able to do it.
The other issue as far as making this go a little faster is the fluoride issue with the wastewater. If we go with a new technology, that kind of takes care of that problem. And we got 5 years? We have 4 years left.
Yeah, we have reports required periodically to show progress toward solving this issue. But yes, if we could remove something that we have to test for out of our permit, that would be great. Instead of keep adding in. We have to test for this monthly right now and report it. And what worries me about the proposal of having a storage tank, and there's also a arsenic has showed up building up in our sludge, and that's a byproduct, I think, Mark, you said, of backwash.
That's the byproduct of the backwash of the filters,
Yeah.
of the pressure filters.
Of the,
Iron filter.
iron filter.
Yeah.
But what worries me is, okay, so they start pumping this down, and they're supposed to leave the iron part in the bottom and not pump that to it. Well, there's human error, you know, it could pump down too far. There'll be sludge buildup, you know, they'll have to clean the tank. It's just, you know, if you can get rid of salt, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Even one plant, not the other, that cuts your
It'd keep us under the limit.
They would keep us under, yeah.
You still need that technology, though, to feed it out slowly.
If we had one that still had the, yeah, you still had one that had the softener, in any case, we'd want to dampen that return flow of that waste. But I think the technology that would get completely away from salt, I mean, it's not a new technology, it's not a foul-fangled, hey, let's try this. I like it because it's tried and proven, and it gets completely away from salt. The unknown of the holding tanks, it also was dependent on the flow and the return of the wastewater, and if we could get a lot of rain when the flows were up, then you could dump more of it. But if you have a real dry year where flows are way down, it makes those concentrations go up. Even though the pounds of salt is always the same, if you got more water to mix it with, your dilution pulls that concentration down. There's always uncertainty with the holding tanks where that other technology would do completely away with salt, so I do like that technology.
What's the cost of the silica versus salt? I mean, is it significantly higher?
No, it'd be dramatically less.
I would think dramatically less, yeah, because it's just basically sand.
So there's basically two benefits. It would reduce
Yeah.
costs, and it would also eliminate the concern at hand.
Yeah.
Who supplies the
The biggest concern is the solid waste that you would be generating and have to dispose of, because you would generate a solid waste as opposed to a liquid waste, which you have now.
Do you know where they purchase the sand at?
You know, I don't.
You know,
Because we have to take bids for salt, so I just wondered if the sand's the same way. No?
I would think you probably, it's going to be packaged or bagged, so there is going to be some cost with it, so you probably are looking at a bidding situation.
Well, let's hope it's more competitive than salt.
Yeah.
How many pounds of salt or sand does that thing hold?
Pardon?
How many pounds of sand does that thing hold?
Those vessels, we got some information from Tonka on these vessels. They're proposing 11-foot diameter vessels. They have an overall height of about 27 feet, so these aren't small vessels. And typically they're filled about 1/3 to 1/2 away of their total volume with sand to start the process. Yeah. I'd have to calculate what that volume is, but
It's about 1,500 pounds, roughly something like
yeah,
that.
probably something like that. Right.
There's actually one of these plants about 1.5 miles west of my house. I actually drink the water that comes off of it. I'm going to stop in, talk with them, get some of those generic questions. Where do you buy your sand at? Where are you disposing of your waste sand product? Just kind of get a little bit more of that to update you guys on. Right now, we've been interacting with the manufacturer, getting a lot of manufacturer's costs.
How soft is the water? I think that's very important too, because like I said before, you don't want the city to start buying water softeners either.
I think you can safely say you can achieve the same levels that you can with the ion exchange salt.
How frequently do you have to change out the sand? I mean, is it...
If you want to...
I'll try, yeah. I've done some calculations on that based on information I have found available from the various manufacturers. I estimate generating approximately somewhere between 1 and 2 cubic yards of waste daily.
Daily?
Yeah, and basically, I'd say a cubic yard is going to be, it's probably going to weigh something comparable to sand or gravel, probably about 100 to 110 pounds per cubic foot. So you're looking at probably about 3 to 4 tons per day.
Well, if you can picture a cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet.
Of solid waste.
But that's not all sand. When he first explained that, we thought they were going through sand.
No, it's not sand. That is calcium carbonate hardness, basically, coming out of solution in the water, yeah.
When I drive by the plant, and I apologize, I don't know the size of the 1.5 miles from my house, but it's a fairly significant plant. Bargersville has 2. They have a concrete bin that's a little smaller. If we would take the room from me forward to you guys, they have a concrete area with sidewalls about this high, and it's actually blown out into this bin area. And I'll typically, routinely when I drive by, I'll see a mound of it, maybe 4 to 5 foot high and maybe 10 foot in diameter, and then all at once it'll be gone. And then several days later, I'll go by and I'll see the mound of sand or calcium material out there. So, I mean, it's going to be an ongoing thing. I mean, it's not massive amounts, but it's still going to be, like Steve said, if you figure 1 to 2 cubic yards a day, that'll give you an idea of how much waste material you generate.
And it could actually be stored out on our 100-acre farm also, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we have to use it, or need it, or can get rid of it, yeah.
So Dan, what are you wanting to hear tonight? Are you wanting us to move forward with the drilling testing?
Yeah, in all honesty, I mean, everything hinges on whether there's water in that woods. I mean, and we can't do anything else until we find that out.
Mm-hmm.
Once you know the answer to that question, you may reshuffle the options that's in the book. But at least the book's like a menu in a restaurant. You've got all the costs, you just may have to pull one up to the surface as the selected plan.
Yep.
And we should do the testing and find out whether water is there before we finish that and submit it to, or should we do that concurrently at the same?
What's that?
I would recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, what that would do, that would change your selected option if we can't find water out there. And again, if we do the environmental based on the east side plant, we would be sending letters off saying we want to build a water plant and wells, and they would do all their environmental analysis. Well, then if we don't build anything there, it's probably a moot point. So I would say probably the water's the highest probability or the priority. And then if we get the confirmation, then I think we kick right back in gear and get that in and submit it to the agencies and see what kind of money they'll offer up on it.
Once the ground freezes, how quickly will they be able to get that well drilled to determine whether water is present?
What did he say? He said they can do it January for you, right? As long as the ground's...
Did he have to do that study first, though?
They do have to do a study. To give you an idea, in another job, we're at the same point. That community authorized them, well, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, to move forward, they have to get with IDEM, they have to do a well site survey, they have to identify, stake everything. IDEM has to come visit the site, make sure that required separations from residences and any contamination. They basically are treating it as if this is going to be one of your final wells, and they have to approve the site that it meets all the criteria. Then they will issue an approval of that, and then you can move on in. Typically, it's about 30 to 45 days, I think he said, 30 days to get that IDEM approval. The actual wells that we're drilling are a little bit smaller than here, but an equivalent depth. They told me with good conditions, they would anticipate 3 to 4 days to drill the well.
So we might be looking at February before we could drill with the permits.
Probably.
Bill?
It looks like that, you're talking about that survey with IDEM, I think that's incorporated here in this call.
It is all in.
That's
It's a full
$400.
deal in there.
Well, you said you have money? This year or next?
I don't personally, you guys do.
No, Dan, we.
No, you. No.
Just to add one thing, the last couple of years when Jim Inskeep was still working, Jim and I had a lot of conversations about water sources, water plants, talking with Bill and some of the guys over the years. Midwest has been out to the woods. You know, it's not a guarantee, but it's very likely that that's where you're going to end up at. I wouldn't be afraid if I was you guys to take the chance of going out there and talking with Peerless, talking with Jim and such.
Are these markers where they crossed here, are these GPS located in? Because they took aerial, right?
They did,
To
but
find these fractures?
what they did on this other job, they actually brought the hydrogeologist out that determined those. It was a lady, and she actually walked the site and was looking for actual physical features on the ground that identified and pinpointed that location. She uses a lot of those same physical features when they identify the fractures, but she actually field located and field staked it.
So it's marked?
But it will be marked. It's not physically marked yet, but she will actually look at that, look at her notes of how she determined it initially, and then she physically goes and locates it in the field.
Well, comments from over here on the side?
I'll make a recommendation that we proceed with the Peerless Midwest
Testing.
testing for
Test drilling.
$66,190.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same. Thank you. Is that all we need to do tonight, Dan? Mark?
Yeah.
Not ready, we have water there.
Yeah.
Get your wishbone out.
Get your stick.
Yeah.
Get the divining rod out.
Go get them defining route.
One thing I might add real quick, and I know I went longer than I told Dan I would. Rural development, the girl that I referenced, Laura Hammond, that's head of the Columbia City office, which would oversee your stuff, she would come meet with you and tell you all the requirements and the rules at your convenience. So that may be something you want to think about just as you start investigating some of the agencies, and you can hear it right straight from them directly and not secondhand through us. We do an awful lot of work with rural development. Almost, I would say, more than half of our projects are funded that way. But it's always good to hear. It's like meeting with your banker face to face, and it's good to talk with them and start developing that relationship. So if that's something you're interested in after the new year, that's something we could help facilitate.
Would it be beneficial to have our rate consultant and possibly even the firm that might be bond counsel present at that meeting as well?
Probably your rate consultant, but you're maybe a little premature with the bond counsel.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thanks again for coming all the way up to Northeast
thank you
Indiana
very
this
much,
evening.
and wish everyone a Merry Christmas.
Mark, your presentation was just a tad better than the last one that the company
You
made.
know, I didn't feel a lot of pressure to beat.
I had to say that, I'm sorry.
I knew that would come up. The bar was pretty low. If I couldn't beat that, I was in trouble. So thank
appreciate
you
it.
all very much.
Yeah, thank you. Roger. And Mr. Dunn.
I've got this stuff. That'll be for council, I guess.
For that, I'm curious to know if we would qualify for the APA for that lower than the
2 weeks ago this evening, we had Mr. Dunn here, and he made his little presentation about mobility and the poles that they would like to propose putting up in Decatur. Tim and myself, predominantly Tim because he's smarter than me, we've been making a lot of phone calls, other communities, talking to IACT, Utility Regulatory Commission, is that how I said, IURC? And Bill and Kim, actually just most recently today, we had a very good dialogue, Tim did, with Brian Gould down at IACT. And I'm going to actually turn this over to Tim, let Tim say what basically IACT and IURC are saying.
Yeah, basically, kind of the threshold question was, is mobility either a utility or a wireless, a utility or a communication service provider? And reading through the statute, it certainly wasn't very clear to me, so I contacted the Indiana Association of Cities and Towns, and I had also previously contacted the IURC, the Regulatory Commission, to try to get some direction or input from those two entities as we kind of discussed and considered the request that had been submitted by Mr. Dunn on behalf of mobility. Long and short of it is, if mobility is either a utility or a communication service provider, then there is a statute, Indiana Code 8-1-32.3-17, which prohibits discriminating against utilities or communication service providers in terms of its access to city right-of-ways. In talking with both IURC and IACT, they have indicated that it is both their positions that mobility is neither a utility nor a community service provider. It is a company that constructs what by definition is called I gotta find it here, a wireless facility, which allows for a service provider to provide wireless services to the surrounding area. So then that basically takes mobility out of that particular statute. It doesn't mean to say that the city doesn't have the ability to permit what mobility is requesting if you so desire. However, it's not a matter of right, as the IURC and IACT have indicated. So it's discretionary on your part. The second thing that I would suggest is that if you do permit mobility to access the city right-of-ways, then you've kind of opened the door for other requests, either by mobility or other companies that construct these wireless support structures. Okay, so the concern that previously was expressed by a number of the department heads was the congestion that already exists within the city right-of-ways. And so that's a secondary issue that you need to consider, is does that by allowing mobility or any other company that provides this type of pole for rent to communication service providers, is that going to impair or impede the city's ability to maintain its own infrastructure, or does it create greater risk that damage could occur either to mobility's pole or other utilities in the course of us maintaining our own infrastructure in our own right-of-way? Those are your decisions to make. And I know that in investigating this with other communities, I believe Mr. Dunn did indicate that Huntington has permitted access to its right-of-ways, but it's my understanding that other communities have chosen not to, which I believe was at least Columbia City and New Haven. So it's a call on the part of the Board of Works whether you wish to allow this. I do know that in, I believe it was in Huntington's case, that they did allow access, but I think they restricted the height of the structures. So if you went that route, that is something that you have the prerogative to do. So I would also say that if the request would be denied, that doesn't in and of itself prevent mobility from utilizing right-of-ways as long as it co-locates on existing poles, which it has the ability to do. To my knowledge, the city has never authorized companies such as Mobility to make use of its right-of-ways, so a denial to Mobility would not necessarily be discriminatory, where in the past you permitted one and now you're not allowing this. But I would suggest that if you do allow Mobility to do it, then you've now opened the door to others coming and requesting, and at that point you're probably prevented from saying no. Otherwise it could be viewed as discriminatory to them. The other thing that I would also note is, and I think Mr. Dunn addressed this a bit, but he indicated that Mobility hasn't really gone much further in terms of looking into co-location, because if you allow this, then that's preferred over that, I think because of the issues that you had suggested a couple weeks ago. But there is provision under the statute that in order to construct a new wireless support structure, there are provisions that suggest that Mobility should show that co-location is not functional, technically infeasible, or it poses an economic burden to the company in order to do that. That's not been done, but I think what you're suggesting is it hasn't been done because if it's allowed as a new structure, you're not going to incur the cost to do this.
Couple items there. I'll start with the co-location. The co-location provision is dealing with cellular towers, and generally speaking, co-location. This technology doesn't go on cellular towers, so that co-location provision doesn't really fit what I was referring to as co-location. If we were looking at co-location, what we'd be looking at locating on would be either other electrical poles,
right,
or
existing poles within right of way.
So the provision that you speak about in the code is actually referring to cellular towers and co-locating on that. So that's not exactly applicable. We can do co-locating on other existing infrastructure potentially. I think what I would start with is just being very clear that this is needed technology. There is the reason that I'm here is because there is a need with constituents here in Decatur of better data with our carrier, and that is why this is being presented. This isn't just because it's fun to do, it's because it's needed. And the reasoning for it to be located in the road right-of-way is because that is the location in which it's feasible to install this at the demand that we need. And also it's where the demand for that data is and is going to be when you start looking at the Internet of Things, and also we're looking at 5 years or less getting to the point where apparently we're going to have self-driving cars. And this is part of that build-out, as well as 5G technology, etc., that all the carriers are going to be going towards. Mobility has their own opinions on some of what Mr. Baker said. That's neither here nor there. It's interpretations of the state code, and that isn't for us to debate here. At some point, somebody may challenge that, and that becomes dealing with in the courts. So
right.
Not worth even worrying about here for me, myself at least. thought as far as decreasing height, yes, we can look at decreasing the pole height. The 75 foot is because that's the optimal height at which the strength of our antenna is still high without it becoming weak, and therefore we can put fewer poles. And so for us, it's a cost-saving measure. For the communities, it means fewer poles and less clutter, as you use the word in the road right-of-way. I think that covers most of what you mentioned.
Sure.
I guess, again, though, I just want to reiterate that the reason I'm here is because this is needed. The demand is there. They don't want to put it, they're not spending the money for fun. They're spending the money because the demand is there. You have constituents within this community that are not getting the data speeds that they need.
But those constituents have the potential to choose a different carrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are many different parts of that, but yes.
Okay. If I don't like the service I'm getting, I can choose to change on my own. But just to clarify, IURC says not public utility.
That's correct.
So who do you register with to be a public utility in the state of Indiana?
You register with IURC.
IURC.
What mobility is, and we don't claim to be a public utility company. We are a CI, a Certified Local Exchange Carrier. A public utility generally is what you're talking, when you're talking about public utility, you're talking about, it gets complicated. Generally your public utility companies are your gas, your electric. I don't believe that even Comcast, Verizon, or Frontier, and those ones will call themselves a
Public
utility. They also will
Communication
consider
service
themselves
provider.
a CELA, as well as fiber optic, and all of those have access to the road right-of-way today and aren't questioned. I understand the questioning about mobility because we are new technology, but we're in the same scope as all of those that often run their equipment within road right-of-way and within easements. Ours just happens to be a single pole. The good thing about that is that the intrusion and damage-wise, you're just putting in a pole and running an electric feed to it. There'll never be anything more than that single pole. And that pole is capable of both carrying multiple carriers on it, as well as carrying other infrastructure on it, whether that be that pole is determined to be a good location for a Cobra Head light at some point in the future by the city or something like that. We have been able to work on those things.
Well, it seems as though Decatur's kind of one of the earlier communities that you've approached, at least in this part of the country, or part of the state anyhow.
I wouldn't say that. I'm dealing with communities all across the South Bend, Fort Wayne region. And locally, we had discussed a few of them. To clarify, New Haven did approve a mini macro, which is what these are. They got concerned about a secondary piece of technology that's called a transport pole, which is taller and dealing directly just with data transport. They did approve a mini macro.
But should we deny this evening, it doesn't mean that at a later time you couldn't come back. Once this becomes more popular and we're more comfortable with it, that we couldn't talk again a year from now or whenever, correct? Or does this mean, no, you're not...
Well, no, I mean, the demand is today.
That's your opinion.
Okay.
That's your opinion. We're all entitled to that.
Your deal. I'm sorry, when I say the demand is here today, I'm saying that the carrier does extensive testing.
If the demand was that popular, there'd be other people knocking at our door right now.
Well, we work with, this build-out is with one carrier.
Sprint.
And, yeah. That carrier does, and all four of the carriers do, extensive data collection on where they have problems, holes, that kind of thing with their network. For whatever reason, and I'm not privy to that information specifically, Decatur has problems for that network, and so this solves that issue.
So what if you don't get it on our right-of-ways, you can purchase private ground and put them up?
No, the issue with this technology is that the coverage for this technology, well, what you're doing is you're dealing with the data part of the, smartphone is mostly now data, some phones. Your phone calls actually still go through the cell towers as we're used to it, And right now, our data is as well. But the data, the latency of your cell phone connecting with the tower is becoming more and more of a problem. You need better data speeds.
Right.
The mini
So what's
cell,
that have to do with the right-of-ways, or right-of-ways?
it's
Just more money for you to spend instead of us to take this responsibility on.
I was trying to get to that.
Is that true? If we say no to letting you into our right-of-ways, you're either going to solve a problem by purchasing private ground. I mean, you're saying that it has to be in a certain spot.
But even if they go to private ground, then they still have to go through a BZA.
Because they're putting towers up.
No, that's not a problem as far as that. I mean, that's just the process that you'd go through. There is a financial consideration to this, absolutely. I'm not going to say there isn't. Road right-of-way, as a CLEC, we have generally the rights to the road right-of-way to install as long as the community is willing to work with us on that. And because of this, the coverage of this system, it's not like a cell tower. The cost of a cell tower is spread over miles. The cost of this is spread over hundreds of feet. So the number of people that are actually benefiting from each one of these is much less than a cell tower. So the cost, cost-benefit analysis, you guys are just doing it with water system, how much you're going to bill out to enhance your water system per person, that's where this becomes a problem. You need that technology as close to that person as possible for those data speeds that people are demanding and for what future technology is going to need. But to be able to do that, you need to put those smaller cells in that allow for those speeds. And generally speaking, the only way to really be able to do that is using the road right-of-way and putting the poles in the road right-of-way, because that gets it easily accessible and in the spots that is needed.
For the sake of time, because we have a couple of other things on the agenda and we have 10 minutes, my personal take, and then we can go from here. Because mobility is not a utility or communication service provider, and because you could co-locate on existing poles and not erect solo poles, because we've not permitted access to right-of-ways to other companies, and if we do, it opens us up to Pandora's box on that. Basically, for those reasons, I am not supportive of approving this evening. And in addition, not creating any congestion of utilities in our right-of-ways. We already have congestion. I hear it every day when we're out. The other day, NIPSCO hit one of our sewer lines, a couple days ago. It happens every day, it seems like. So, any opinions over here? It's up to us three.
I guess another thing that basically concerns me, we've not had any real requests to offer this service.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
like I said, Mr. Dunn says it's needed, but that's, like I said, that's an opinion.
yeah.
And maybe it will be needed.
Exactly, and maybe we don't want to be on the cutting edge, because sometimes the cutting edges can become pretty crowded. So.
I mean, I can see where technology is growing and how this could be applicable as people get away from landlines altogether, and data is, they're not even, a lot of people are not even using cable services anymore, right? They're just getting TV in a different way. And as data transfers from hardline to over the air. But I guess my concern with this is just that the idea that it is a single provider. I realize that mobility can work with other ones, but the demand signal is coming from a specific provider. And from a straight, market competition standpoint, like if I'm not happy with my service, I do something different. The cost is on the user. The cost is to the company to erect those poles if they want to, and to purchase, to put up. But to put it on the city, there's no cost aside from it's a right-of-way issue. It's a, we're going to use your land to make a profit for a small amount of people, or to service a smaller group of people. So that's where I feel like this doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess my question, though, so you're suggesting right now, as it is, that you're not in favor of that?
No, I'm not.
Does that open, maybe you've already heard it from other department heads and utilities, are they concerned about co-locating on existing light poles or structures, which would not get you to your 75-foot height, which you're requesting? But
I've not had that discussion.
okay.
I would make a recommendation to deny it as of today.
Is that a motion?
A motion, I'll make that motion.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Try again another day. I'm sorry, but that's kind of how we feel tonight. Next on the agenda, Bill Slike. Bill, sorry not to give you much time, but you're going to hang around and talk again here in a few minutes.
How's everyone doing?
Okay, Bill. You're not going to be as exciting, are you?
I hope not. This should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to start, I guess?
Well,
Give me a
to
lead.
keep it brief, because by advertising, we have a meeting in 4 minutes.
Okay.
We need to do the change orders real quick.
Yep.
Yep.
We have, I'd say the three things that have to get done. You have a pay request first.
Yep.
That is,
Fleming's.
you've been submitted and gone through and we reviewed for Fleming through the end of November.
Pay application number 6 for Fleming.
Dan's still here? No. Well, I think on this pay app, Bill, do you remember that they approved, Board of Works approved back in August to pay half from the water utility and half from the sewer bond?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure you were aware of that.
Yes.
So I didn't know if that makes a difference in your totals or not. Probably not. You probably don't care where the money comes from as long as
Right.
Fleming's.
Right. This is the contract for Fleming, so how you guys, as far as I know, is that the one change order needs to be split, how you guys are funding it, I guess, but I was never explained, it was never explained to me that I needed to differentiate that.
Okay.
So that one was already approved though, wasn't it?
That was approved back in August.
Yeah. So
This one is how much?
this one is, I don't have it open.
I had it $317,778.61.
Is ready to spend that much?
I'll make a motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same.
Okay.
No brainer.
That's the easy, quick one. The next two, we have two new change orders to go over with this. The first one is change order 4, which resolves 2 field changes that we needed to make. There was water main that was not marked and located in the field that got damaged, and the Fleming had, Dan and Jeremy were the ones that went out and I think took care of this, got it taken care of, closed up. They had to shut off the water. It was a main near the blue tank, the CSO tanks. That part of it's $1,748 for the repair to the 6-inch water line. And then the second part was on the interceptor main between structures 116 and 117, which was behind where the Loshi building had been. There was a structure that was uncovered that is part of the storm system yet.
and it was in line with the revised alignment that when we gave them to change the alignment to open cut through there. So they already had a couple of sticks of pipe laid when they discovered this, and they had to go back in. It was still much cheaper to relay those two pieces and avoid that structure. So we went out and we discussed it. We all discussed it at the meeting. Both of these, the one was a field change that just had to be done immediately. The first one, Part A. Part B, we discussed at the meeting. We went out, looked at it, and said, yeah, this just makes sense. Let's relay those two sticks of pipe. And that one had a cost of, because it's so deep, of $4,376 for a total on this change order. It's $6,124. And we've recommended that. I've got all the paperwork up, submitted for you guys to authorize that.
All these change orders were discussed at the
project meetings
that we've had. Jeremy and myself were all familiar with them, so I suggest that we approve the change order number 4.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same. And then number 5?
Number 5, change order number 5, because of various things that happened with the timing of the construction, it was discussed that we would, we need to shift the substantial completion. There's one item remaining for substantial completion. They need the stop logs. All the piping is in. We need the stop logs to complete the bypass at the one structure between the relief sewer and the interceptor and the overflow. That's expected in the next few weeks. That will put us at substantial completion. The original substantial completion was set for October 31. We're obviously past that. The contractor has been working diligently. Everybody's pleased with the progress that we talked to. And then once they complete that, they will go on a winter hiatus from February 1st to approximately April 15th. This is a bad time of the year to be trying to do new asphalt surfaces and seeding, and then they'll come back, and we've given them until June 15th to do the final completion where they'll do all the seeding, rather than trying to rush it this fall and then have to come back and redo the work in the spring. We just said, let's just do that in spring. So this changes the substantial and final completion dates from October 31st and November 30th to January 31st, 2017 and June 15th, 2017. There are no costs associated with this change.
Right.
So, and we've recommended that per the discussions we've had in the progress meetings with your staff and everyone else. So,
I concur.
Okay.
Motion?
So moved, yeah. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
We'll talk to you here in just a couple minutes. You can just stay right there if you want.
Okay.
We'll probably open the meeting up with that. Don't have time for the last thing on the agenda, which was code enforcement. So we'll come back to that here in a couple of weeks. If I could have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same. We're adjourned.